A city drowned overnight, over 1,800 lives lost, $125 billion in destruction, a broken levee system, and a government response under fire. This is the story of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, one of the most shocking disasters in U.S. history. In just a matter of hours, New Orleans went from a vibrant cultural hub to a flooded nightmare, exposing failures no one was prepared to face. How did a powerful storm turn into a full-scale humanitarian crisis? Why were thousands left behind? And what really happened when the system collapsed? Stay with this story to uncover the truth behind the chaos, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into real-world events. In late August 2005, a seemingly ordinary tropical disturbance began to organize over the warm waters near the Bahamas, quietly setting the stage for what would become one of the most devastating storms in U.S. history. By the 23rd of August 2005, it had officially formed into a tropical depression, and within hours, it strengthened into a named storm, now known as Hurricane Katrina. As it drifted westward, the system gained momentum and made its first landfall in Florida as a Category 1 hurricane, causing localized damage but not yet revealing its full destructive potential. After crossing into the Gulf of Mexico, everything changed as the storm encountered extremely warm water and ideal atmospheric conditions, fueling an explosive intensification that pushed it into a terrifying Category 5 hurricane with winds reaching nearly 175 miles per hour. Meteorologists quickly recognized the growing threat, issuing increasingly urgent warnings as Katrina expanded in size and strength, covering a vast area and becoming not just powerful but dangerously massive. Along the vulnerable coastline of Louisiana, officials began to grasp the severity of the situation, especially in the low-lying city of New Orleans, where much of the land sits below sea level and relies heavily on a fragile system of levees. By the 28th of August 2005, authorities issued a rare and dramatic mandatory evacuation order, urging over 1 million residents across the region to leave immediately as the storm approached. Highways filled with traffic as thousands fled inland, creating one of the largest evacuations in American history, yet the evacuation was far from complete. Many residents, particularly the elderly, the poor, and those without access to transportation, were unable to leave, exposing deep social and economic divides that would later become impossible to ignore. Public shelters were opened, including the Louisiana Superdome, which was designated as a refuge of last resort for those with nowhere else to go. Despite the urgency, a significant number of people chose to stay behind, either underestimating the storm or lacking the resources to escape. Officials and experts warned that the region's levee system was not designed to withstand a storm of this magnitude, raising fears of catastrophic flooding if the defenses failed. Emergency agencies, including FEMA, began mobilizing resources, but coordination issues and delayed responses hinted at deeper systemic problems. The atmosphere across the Gulf Coast grew tense as forecasts became more alarming, with predictions of massive storm surge and widespread destruction dominating national headlines. Businesses shut down, airports closed, and the region braced for impact as time rapidly ran out. What made the situation especially dangerous was not just the storm's strength, but its sheer size, which meant its impact would stretch far beyond a single point of landfall. As Katrina continued its path toward the Gulf Coast, it carried with it a sense of inevitability, a looming disaster that many feared but few fully understood. In those final hours before landfall, the region stood on the edge of a crisis that would soon expose critical weaknesses in infrastructure, emergency planning, and social equity, setting the stage for a tragedy that would unfold in ways no one could fully control or contain. As dawn broke on the 29th of August 2005, Hurricane Katrina surged toward the Gulf Coast with relentless force, marking the beginning of a catastrophe that would redefine disaster response in the United States. Although the storm had weakened slightly to a Category 3 hurricane, its immense size and power drove a massive storm surge exceeding 25 feet along parts of the Mississippi coast, flattening entire communities within hours. Coastal towns such as Biloxi and Gulfport were slammed by walls of water that swept away homes, businesses, and infrastructure, leaving behind scenes of total devastation. Meanwhile, in New Orleans, the real nightmare was only beginning, as the city's long-feared vulnerability turned into a deadly reality. By mid-morning, multiple breaches began to appear in the levee system, including critical failures along the Industrial Canal and the 17th Street Canal, allowing water from nearby lakes and waterways to pour uncontrollably into the city. Within a matter of hours, entire neighborhoods were submerged, and by the end of the day, roughly 80% of New Orleans was underwater, with some areas facing flood depths of over 15 feet. Residents who had remained behind suddenly found themselves trapped, many forced to climb onto rooftops or into attics to escape the rapidly rising water. Emergency calls flooded local systems, but communication networks quickly collapsed, leaving thousands without any way to reach help. The Louisiana Superdome, which had been designated as a last resort shelter, became overcrowded with more than 25,000 people, far exceeding its intended capacity and quickly running out of basic supplies. Conditions inside deteriorated rapidly as electricity failed, temperatures soared, and access to clean water and sanitation became dangerously limited. Outside, the city descended into chaos as streets turned into rivers and rescue efforts struggled to gain momentum. Helicopters and boats began pulling survivors from rooftops, but the scale of the disaster overwhelmed available resources, creating scenes of desperation broadcast across national television. In many areas, law enforcement presence thinned, leading to widespread reports of looting and unrest, further complicating rescue operations. Hospitals were pushed to their limits, with staff working under extreme conditions as backup generators failed and patients were stranded without adequate care. The broader region also faced severe damage as power outages spread across multiple states, affecting millions and crippling essential services. Highways were blocked by debris, bridges were destroyed, and entire sections of infrastructure were rendered unusable, isolating communities in their most vulnerable moments. The sheer geographic reach of the storm meant that relief efforts had to be coordinated across a vast area, stretching resources thin and delaying critical assistance. As hours turned into days, frustration grew over the slow and disorganized response from federal agencies, particularly FEMA, whose efforts were widely criticized for lacking urgency and coordination. Images of stranded families, elderly residents, and children waiting for rescue became symbols of a system struggling to respond to a disaster of this magnitude. The failure of the levee system was not just an engineering breakdown, but a turning point that transformed a powerful storm into a full-scale humanitarian crisis. By the end of August 29, it was clear that this was no ordinary hurricane, but a disaster that had exposed deep vulnerabilities in urban planning, emergency preparedness, and national response systems, leaving millions watching in shock and setting the stage for a long and painful aftermath that would test the resilience of an entire nation. In the days following the 30th of August 2005, the full scale of the disaster left by Hurricane Katrina began to emerge, revealing a humanitarian crisis that extended far beyond the initial impact of the storm. Floodwaters lingered across New Orleans for weeks, turning entire neighborhoods into toxic zones filled with debris, chemicals, and stagnant water that made rescue and recovery operations even more dangerous. Thousands of survivors were evacuated to temporary shelters across the United States, including large relocation centers in Texas, where families were separated and forced to rebuild their lives from nothing. The official death toll eventually surpassed 1,800 lives lost, a staggering number that only hinted at the widespread suffering experienced by those who survived. Economic losses were estimated at over $125 billion, making Katrina one of the costliest disasters in American history and leaving long-term scars on the national economy. Entire communities along the Gulf Coast were wiped off the map, and many residents would never return, leading to a dramatic population decline in key areas. In New Orleans, the demographic landscape shifted significantly as thousands of displaced residents settled permanently in other states, reshaping the cultural identity of the city. The failure of federal response systems became a central point of national debate, with intense scrutiny placed on FEMA and its leadership, as critics argued that delays and poor coordination had worsened the crisis. Investigations revealed deep flaws in emergency planning, communication breakdowns, and a lack of preparedness for a disaster of this scale. The catastrophe also exposed stark social inequality, as many of the hardest-hit victims were from low-income communities who lacked the resources to evacuate or recover quickly. Images of abandoned neighborhoods and desperate families became powerful symbols of systemic neglect, sparking widespread outrage and calls for reform. In response, the federal government initiated sweeping changes to disaster management policies, including major investments in infrastructure and emergency preparedness. The levee system protecting New Orleans underwent a massive overhaul, with billions of dollars allocated to strengthen flood defenses and prevent future failures. Reconstruction efforts took years, with some areas recovering faster than others, while certain neighborhoods remained scarred long after the waters receded. Volunteers, nonprofits, and community organizations played a crucial role in rebuilding efforts, stepping in where official systems had fallen short. The disaster also had a lasting impact on environmental policy, as discussions around climate change and coastal vulnerability gained new urgency in the wake of Katrina's destruction. Insurance systems were reevaluated, and new building codes were introduced to improve resilience against future storms. Despite these efforts, recovery was uneven, and many survivors continued to struggle with economic hardship, mental trauma, and the loss of community ties. Over time, Hurricane Katrina became more than just a natural disaster. It evolved into a defining moment that reshaped how the nation understands risk, responsibility, and resilience. The lessons learned from 2005 continue to influence how authorities prepare for and respond to large-scale emergencies today, serving as a constant reminder of what can happen when preparation falls short. Even years later, the memory of Katrina remains deeply embedded in the national consciousness, not only as a story of destruction, but also as a powerful reflection of human vulnerability and institutional failure. Hurricane Katrina was more than just a storm. It was a turning point that revealed deep cracks in infrastructure, leadership, and social systems across the United States. The lessons from 2005 continue to shape how disasters are handled today, yet the scars remain visible in New Orleans and beyond. This tragedy reminds us that preparation, equality, and accountability are not optional, they are essential. If you found this story insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay informed with more powerful stories that matter.